Hola? What's the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, cloudy? Comment below.
They always said they couldn't afford it. That was the go-to line, repeated so often it became a background hum in my childhood, like the buzz of a fridge or the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. So consistent, so warmal, that I stopped hearing how unfair it was. We'd love to, honey, but we just don't have the money this year. I'd nod, pretending to understand, trying not to let the sting show, while my little brother Jason, 4 years younger and somehow 100 times more celebrated, unwrapped another expensive gift, or walked into a birthday party in a rented ballroom with gold balloons spelling out his name like he was some local celebrity. I remember one birthday of mine in particular. I must have been turning 11. I came home from school, wearing the same pair of jeans I'd been stretching through 2 growth spurts, hoping maybe this year there'd be a surprise, maybe a cake, a card, something. Instead, Mom met me at the door with a tired smile and said, "We didn't have time to do much, but I picked you up a muffin on my lunch break. A blueberry one, half crushed in a gas station bag, with a single bent candle stuck in the middle. We lit it with a cigarette lighter and sang Happy Birthday in the kitchen while my dad watched a game in the next room, and Jason cried because he didn't like the smell of melted wax. That was it. That was the whole celebration. And the thing is, I didn't even cry. I didn't throw a tantrum or ask why. I just swallowed it, tucked the hurt somewhere deep, and told myself it was fine. Because every time I did try to speak up about the gifts, the trips, the parties, the attention, it turned into a guilt trip about how hard things were. "You know we're trying our best, sweetheart," my mom would say, rubbing her temples like the weight of my existence was giving her a headache. "You know we love you just as much." And maybe they did in their own way. But love that skips your birthday for 5 years in a row while spending hundreds on your brother's sweet 16 hits different. Jason got a new car when he turned 17, a blue Honda Civic with a bow on it in the driveway. My dad even filmed it on his phone while Jason shouted and jumped like he'd won the lottery. I watched from the window, pretending to be happy for him, while my own 17th birthday had come and gone without even a card. I was told we couldn't afford it, that things were just tight this year. Yet somehow they managed to scrape together money for Jason's driving lessons, his senior trip, his college dorm furniture, things that, for me, had always been maybe someday. Even now, thinking back, I try to remember if there was ever a moment they truly saw me, not just the version of me that was easy, quiet, low maintenance, but the real me, the one that craved a little attention, a little celebration, a little damn acknowledgement. But no, my job was to be grateful for the scraps, to cheer from the sidelines, to be the understanding daughter who didn't need much. And I played that role so well, they never even saw what it cost me. There was one Christmas that really stuck in my mind, not because it was particularly terrible, but because it was so calmly cruel, I couldn't forget it. I was 19, home from college, working a part-time job at a bookstore to pay for my textbooks. My parents sat us down and said, "This year, we're not doing gifts. We just want to spend time together, focus on what really matters." I nodded, of course. That's what I was trained to do. But then, on Christmas morning, Jason came downstairs and opened a brand new PlayStation, headphones, and 3 games. My mom said, "Oh well, this was from us and also from his godfather. We didn't want to ruin the tradition." I just stood there holding a cup of instant coffee and tried not to let my hand shake. That moment, that morning, it was the first time I realized something was deeply wrong. I wasn't imagining the difference. I wasn't being sensitive or dramatic. I was being sidelined, quietly, consistently, and without remorse. And yet I never told anyone, not a friend, not a boyfriend, not even a therapist. I carried it all inside like an old injury that had stopped bleeding but never quite healed. I told myself I was stronger for it, more independent, more grounded. But really, I was just exhausted, tired of pretending it didn't matter, tired of shrinking myself to make room for someone else's spotlight. Have you ever felt like the background character in your own family? Like no matter what you do, you're just the extra. I wonder how many people out there got told the same thing I did. that they were just so mature for handling disappointment, that they were easy to raise because they didn't make noise, that they didn't need as much because they were not like their sibling. If that was you, I see you. But back then, I didn't say a word. I just kept playing my part, smiling through it. Until one day, years later, when everything finally shifted, and I made sure they felt every ounce of that neglect. Not through shouting, not through confrontation, but through something far more effective. A single photo, a silent message, a line they'll never forget. But we're not there yet. We're still in the before. In the silence. In the part of the story where I was invisible. Just wait, it gets better. Or worse, depending on who you ask. The years that followed felt like one long gray blur. A sequence of quiet mornings, late nights, and the same repetitive lie I told myself every time I opened a birthday card. With nothing inside. Or watched Jason be handed another opportunity on a silver platter. It's fine, I'm used to it. I moved through my 20s like a ghost in my own life, present but never seen, heard but never listened to, constantly walking the tightrope of being the dependable daughter who never asked for anything, never complained, never needed help. And somehow, that very trait, the one they praised me for, my independence, became the noose that tightened every time I came home and saw yet another framed photo of Jason with his college buddies, another new thing he'd been gifted, just because he needed it. After high school, I didn't even ask for help with tuition. I knew better. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one summer afternoon before freshman year, pencil in hand, bills scattered around me, trying to figure out how I was going to make it all work. My mom came in, looked at the spreadsheet I'd made, and said, "You're always so organized, Em. It's such a blessing you don't need much." And then she walked out, leaving behind the faint smell of her perfume, and a silence so deep it felt like a slap. Meanwhile, Jason, who'd been on academic probation twice, still got a brand new MacBook and a furnished dorm that looked like a Pinterest ad. It's not that I was jealous in the way people think. There wasn't this boiling rage or pettiness in my chest. It was more like erosion, slow, steady, quiet. Like every time he was celebrated, I was erased a little more, until the version of me they saw was just a collection of assumptions. She's fine, she's strong, she doesn't need anything. I started believing it too. I worked 2 jobs through college, one in a bookstore and another answering phones at a dentist's office, barely sleeping, living off microwave noodles and quiet resentment. Jason failed classes and got extensions. I aced mine and got silence. And yet, I still tried to be part of the family. I still showed up at holidays, brought thoughtful gifts nobody remembered, listened patiently as my parents bragged about Jason's latest adventure, his semester abroad, his job that my uncle pulled strings to get him into, his new girlfriend who might be the one, while I sat there with nothing to add that would interest anyone. If I mentioned work, they changed the subject. If I mentioned struggling, they looked uncomfortable, like I was disturbing the peace. I started making myself smaller, shorter visits, fewer calls, more reasons to stay away. I told myself it was about work, about boundaries, about becoming my own person, but deep down, I just couldn't take being invisible anymore. There was a Thanksgiving that broke something in me. I had just landed my first big client, a major breakthrough after years of freelancing with low rates and high stress. I was proud of myself in a way I hadn't been in years. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the moment they'd finally see me. I brought a bottle of good wine, wore a dress that made me feel successful, and even printed a few mock-ups of my work, just in case someone asked. But nobody did. Instead, the entire dinner revolved around Jason's latest trip to Miami with his buddies. A drunken escapade that ended with a lost passport and somehow became the comedic highlight of the evening. My dad laughed until he coughed. My mom wiped tears from her eyes. Jason, of course, loved the attention, and I sat there, quiet, eating cold stuffing and wondering how the hell I became a guest star in a show called The Jason Show. I left early that night. No one noticed. When my 30th birthday rolled around, I didn't expect much. But I still had that tiny flicker of hope, that irrational child inside me still waiting for the candlelit cake, the surprise party, the moment I'd be center stage just once. Instead, Jason called me in the morning to ask if I could help him revise his resume. He didn't say happy birthday until I reminded him. My mom sent me a text 2 days later. Happy belated? So sorry, things have been crazy. I didn't reply. That was the first time I went completely silent. No thank you, no it's okay, just nothing, a deadline. That silence felt powerful, not because it hurt them, I'm not sure they even noticed, but because it was the first time I didn't perform. I didn't make them feel better about neglecting me. I didn't excuse them, didn't comfort them, didn't offer my usual emotional labor. I just let the gap between us widen, and in that gap, I started to breathe again. These years, my 20s, my so-called formative decade, were nothing like the freedom-filled adventures you see in movies. They were years of relentless effort, of clawing my way towards some version of stability while pretending it didn't kill me that my parents seemed more invested in my brother's bar crawl itinerary than in my entire life. I didn't date much, I didn't travel, I didn't splurge. Every dollar I made went to bills, to savings, to investing in myself. And they never asked. Never once said, "Emily, how are you really doing?" By the time I was 32, I had enough in my savings to finally exhale. I'd built something solid, something real. I had no one to thank but myself. And strangely, that made me lonelier than I expected. Because all I'd ever wanted wasn't money or stuff or some parade. I just wanted to be noticed, to matter, to be held up with the same pride they handed Jason like candy. But I was done waiting. I was done earning their attention like some desperate intern hoping for a promotion. That version of me, the ghost version, was gone. Buried under spreadsheets and sweat and years of silence. I was about to reintroduce myself. And this time, no one would be able to ignore me. It didn't happen all at once, like a movie montage where the underdog suddenly gets the big break and the music swells. No, for me, it was a series of slow, quiet victories that added up over time, built piece by piece in silence. In the dark hours after midnight, while others slept, while Jason posted selfies from breweries and ski trips, while my parents settled into the comforting routine of forgetting to ask how I was doing. And maybe that's what made it so satisfying in the end. Not the money itself, not the house or the post or even the reactions, but the fact that every single step I took toward that lake house was mine and mine alone, untouched by favoritism, unassisted by indulgent parents or second chances or undeserved praise. I had been freelancing for nearly 8 years, scraping by at first, chasing invoices, answering emails at all hours just to prove I was worth hiring again. Most people around me saw it as unstable, a phase, something I'd give up eventually when I settled down, as if settling down was the ultimate goal, and not just a polite phrase for giving up. But I kept at it, not because I loved the instability, but because I loved what it represented. Control. It was the one area of my life where no one could take anything away from me, where my worth wasn't decided by a parent's blind spot or a sibling's louder voice. If I succeeded, it was because I earned it, and if I failed, at least it was on my own terms. It was about 5 months before I bought the house when I landed a client that changed everything. A mid-sized tech company that had just secured Series B funding and needed a financial strategist to guide their growth. They found me through word of mouth, recommended by someone I barely remembered working with 3 years prior. The contract was massive, 6 figures, retainer guaranteed. It terrified me, honestly. Holding that kind of responsibility, being seen as the expert instead of the helper. But I said yes before they could change their minds, and I dove in head first. 3 months later, they renewed the contract. Then they referred 2 more companies. For the first time in my life, I had not just income, but stability. And more than that, proof that I wasn't crazy for believing in myself. All those years when no one else did. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Jason. I didn't even tell Lena, my closest friend, until the paperwork for the house was already signed. Not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because some victories are so precious, they feel almost too delicate to share right away. Like a fragile new thing that might crumble if exposed to the same old voices that never believed you could have it in the first place. The lake house wasn't flashy. It wasn't some massive mansion with a pool and a tennis court. It was peaceful, tucked away in the woods about 2 hours outside the city, sitting quietly on the edge of a private lake with a wraparound porch and wide windows that let the sunlight in like it belonged there. I remember walking through it for the first time with the realtor and feeling something settle inside me, like my soul had been holding its breath for 30 years and finally let it out. This place wasn't just a reward. It was a reclamation. I moved in on a Friday. No ceremony, no champagne, just a rented U-Haul and the smell of pine and fresh paint. I spent the first night on an air mattress in the living room, with my laptop balanced on a cardboard box eating takeout and listening to the water lap gently against the dock. That was the night I posted the photo. It was simple, intentionally so, just me in an oversized hoodie, holding a coffee mug, sitting on the edge of the dock with the house in the background and the lake stretching out behind me like a quiet, silver promise. The caption read, "Thanks for the motivation." That was it. No tags, no emojis, no location, just those 4 words. And yet it landed like a bomb. I didn't check my phone for the first few hours after I posted it. I wanted to savor the silence, the stillness, the rare feeling of having nothing and no one to perform for. But when I finally looked, I was stunned by how fast the reactions came in, not from strangers, not from followers or coworkers, but from family. 3 missed calls from my mom, 2 from Jason, 1 from my dad, which was rare enough to make me pause. Then the text started. My mom's first. "Emily, what is this about?" Then Jason's. "Wow, must be nice to throw shade online instead of picking up the phone like a grown-up." My dad, predictably, sent nothing, just a voicemail I didn't open for 2 days. The passive-aggressive comments came in next. A cousin commented, "Success looks good on you. Hope we get invited to the next family party, but..." if there is one. An aunt messaged, "Your mom is really hurt by your post. Just thought you should know." Suddenly, a quiet picture of peace had turned into a battlefield. And I didn't delete it. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I didn't owe them the erasure of my story. That's what they never understood. My silence was an agreement. It wasn't forgiveness. It was survival. And now that I finally had something of my own, something no one could take away, I wasn't going to pretend it didn't matter. I wasn't going to package it in politeness so they could feel comfortable about years they spent looking right through me. That photo wasn't a boast. It was a line in the sand, a signal to myself that I was done begging to be noticed. But I didn't expect what came next. I didn't expect the guilt, the manipulation, the way they twisted it into an attack instead of a response. I didn't expect how quickly pride could turn to resentment when you finally stop playing small. The photo didn't just change my life. It cracked something open in my family that had been sealed shut for decades. And once that crack started spreading, there was no stopping what came pouring out. What followed the photo wasn't the quiet, introspective reckoning I had, perhaps naively, hoped for. It wasn't a moment where my family paused, reflected, and realized the years they'd spent overlooking me had consequences that went beyond forgotten birthdays or unacknowledged accomplishments. No, what came instead was something far more predictable and far more bitter. Outrage disguised as confusion, guilt dressed up as concern, and the same old manipulation, now filtered through wounded pride and the fear that, for the first time, I wasn't going to fall in line and make everyone else feel better about the choices they had made at my expense. The shift was immediate, almost clinical in its efficiency. My mother, ever the emotional tactician, pivoted from shocked silence to martyrdom within a day, calling my aunt, my cousin, even Lena, and framing the entire situation as a misunderstanding caused by Emily's tendency to take things too personally. It was astonishing, really, how quickly they made my quiet moment of joy into a character flaw, how they twisted my caption, 4 words, stripped of accusation or detail, into a declaration of war. Jason, true to form, didn't waste time with subtlety. His first message after the photo, sent late at night, read, "So I guess I'm the villain now? Cool, real classy, M." When I didn't respond, he followed it with a screenshot of the post and the message, "You know Mom cried over this, right?" That was the moment I knew they hadn't learned anything, hadn't questioned anything, hadn't even considered that my success, instead of being a betrayal, might have been the inevitable result of being ignored for so long that I had no choice but to build something of my own just to survive emotionally. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to clarify, to soften the blow, to take on the emotional burden of making them feel comfortable about my discomfort. I simply sat with the silence. I didn't call, I didn't explain. I let their accusations hang in the air like smoke from a fire they'd started themselves. And in that space, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not bitterness, but clarity, the story they had been telling themselves. The one where I was the stoic daughter who didn't need anything, who always smiled and never asked for more, was no longer serving me, and I had no interest in performing it any longer. Still, some part of me, likely the part conditioned by years of people-pleasing, felt compelled to confront it, not to apologize, but to confront the lie head-on. So I did what I knew would be both unexpected and impossible for them to ignore. I invited them to the lake house. Not for a weekend, not for a vacation, but for a single evening, a dinner, just us, just once. The invitation was delivered in a simple email, free from emotional bait or guilt, no flowery language, just a date, a time, and a note that said, "I thought it was time we talked." My mother responded first, suspiciously eager, saying they'd love to see the new place. Jason followed with a single thumbs-up reply, passive-aggressive even in his enthusiasm. My dad, predictably, said nothing, but I knew he'd show up, dragged along more by routine than curiosity. The night of the dinner, I stood in my kitchen preparing food, not because I believed they deserved a home-cooked meal, but because I needed something to do with my hands. Something to focus on while I braced myself for the inevitable theater of polite conversation, underlying tension and unspoken accusations. When they arrived, they brought wine, cheap, sweet, and completely misaligned with the menu I'd prepared, and complimented the house with the kind of tight-lipped praise that barely concealed their disbelief. My mother said it was cozy, which, in her vocabulary, meant smaller than expected. Jason wandered through the living room, taking mental inventory, asking about the mortgage, the renovations, who helped me with the down payment. Each question more pointed than the last. We sat down to eat as the sun set behind the lake, casting long golden shadows through the wide windows. And for a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could talk like adults, not actors in a family play we'd been rehearsing for decades. But almost immediately, my mother brought up the post. "I wish you'd just told us you felt that way instead of making it public," she said, her voice quivering with the exact amount of performative sadness she'd mastered years ago. I looked at her, then at Jason, who rolled his eyes like he was the real victim in all this, and I realized they didn't come to listen or understand. They came to reset the narrative, to pull me back into the role I'd finally escaped. So I let them talk. I let them justify and explain and twist the story into one where I had distanced myself and never let them in. I listened, nodding occasionally, not because I agreed, but because I was saving my words for the moment that mattered. When the plates were cleared and the wine was half finished, I excused myself and returned with 3 small envelopes, one for each of them. Inside, a single sentence printed in clean, bold font. "Thanks for the motivation. No name, no explanation, just the words they had pushed me toward without ever realizing it." I handed them out silently, sat back down, and watched their reactions. My mother blinked rapidly, as if trying to decipher a hidden meaning. My father stared at the words like they were written in a foreign language. Jason snorted, crumpled his note, and muttered, "You're so dramatic," as he tossed it onto the table. I didn't say a word, I didn't need to, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to be understood. I wasn't performing humility or begging for validation. I was simply showing them the result of everything they'd taught me: how to survive without being seen, how to work without thanks, how to build something real in the absence of applause. And as they sat there stewing in confusion, discomfort, maybe even shame, I realized something I hadn't expected. I no longer needed their recognition to feel complete. This wasn't about revenge. This was about rewriting the script. There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in the wake of truth being spoken aloud. A silence that doesn't beg to be filled with small talk or empty reassurances, but instead demands to be felt in full. An uncomfortable, weighted stillness that wraps around every person in the room like fog on a cold morning, clinging to the skin, making every movement feel deliberate and slow. That's the silence that followed my final sentence at the dinner table, not because it was shocking or cruel, not because it was shouted or dramatic, but because it was quiet, firm, undeniable, and because somewhere deep in the part of them that still remembered the child they'd left behind in their own house, they knew it was true. They stayed for another 20 minutes after that. But it was only in body, not in spirit. The room, once filled with forced cheer and surface-level chatter, had become a minefield of unspoken emotions, and the space between us, once crowded with my efforts to make them feel better, was now just space, raw and honest and heavy. My mother picked at the edge of the envelope with her nail, not reading it again, but refusing to put it down, as if holding it somehow gave her control over its meaning. My father shifted in his chair, his usual stoic silence now stretched so thin it was almost translucent. And Jason, of course, kept his arms crossed like a shield across his chest, his face betraying the quiet fury of someone who had always counted on being adored without earning it. When they finally stood to leave, it was awkward and unceremonious. My mother said thank you in a voice that was all breath and no conviction. My dad mumbled something about traffic, and Jason didn't even look at me when he walked out, just muttered under his breath, "You always had a way of making everything about you." And in that moment, as I watched their backs recede down the stone pathway toward their car, I didn't feel vindicated or victorious or even angry. I felt calm. I felt like a page had been turned not with a slam, but with a slow, deliberate motion, like someone closing a book they had outgrown. After they were gone, I didn't rush to clean up the dishes or scroll through my phone for distractions. I just sat there, at the same table where the food had gone cold, and the wine glasses still held the remnants of a failed attempt at reconnection. And I let myself feel everything: grief, release, loneliness, and a strange, quiet kind of joy. Not the giddy, celebratory kind of joy that comes from getting what you want, but the deep, anchoring kind that comes from finally understanding that you never needed their permission to become who you are. For days after that dinner, there was radio silence, no follow-up calls, no texts, no carefully worded Facebook messages, just absence, which, for the first time, didn't feel like rejection. It felt like space, like breathing room, like possibility. I returned to my routines, met with clients, took long walks by the lake, and found myself laughing more often than I expected. Not because life was suddenly easy or perfect, but because something fundamental had shifted. The performance was over. I no longer had to bend myself into shapes for their comfort. I no longer had to translate my achievements into a language they could understand. I was, for the first time in my life, fully fluent in myself. A week later, Lena came to visit. She had seen the post, of course, and she had pieced together more than I had told her, because true friends often know what you're not saying. We sat on the dock with our feet in the water, and she asked me one question: "Do you feel better?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because it felt too simple for everything that had happened. Eventually, I said, "I feel free," and that was the truth, or at least the closest I could get to it. It's funny, the things people think will hurt you. My family thought it was the absence of gifts, the forgotten birthdays, the subtle comparisons, but those were just symptoms. What really left scars was the consistent, deliberate refusal to see me as a full person, someone worthy of celebration, not for being exceptional or easy, but simply for existing. They thought my success was a weapon I was using against them, but really it was a shield I'd built out of every dismissal, every eye roll, every time they told me they just couldn't afford to celebrate me. That shield had kept me alive. That shield had brought me here. I've heard people say that revenge is hollow, that it doesn't give you the closure you think it will, but I don't agree, not because I believe in vengeance, but because what I did wasn't revenge. It was a correction, a redirection of narrative, a refusal to be cast in a role I never auditioned for. The photo, the dinner, the note, those weren't acts of cruelty. They were acts of truth, and truth, when you've lived so long without it, can be the kindest thing you give yourself. They haven't spoken to me since. Not really. Jason unfollowed me on everything, which is fine. My mother sends the occasional check-in text, polite and empty. My father, as always, remains an enigma behind a screen of silence. I don't know if they'll ever come around, if they'll ever see me without the filter of their own disappointment or defensiveness. And honestly, I'm not sure it matters anymore. Because the story didn't end with their reaction. The story ends here, with me, in this house, on this dock, holding a mug of coffee and watching the water ripple under a quiet morning sky, not waiting for applause, not needing approval, simply existing as fully and loudly as I was always meant to. Maybe one day they'll look back and understand that the point wasn't the lake house, or the caption, or even the dinner. Maybe they'll realize the message was never about them. It was about me, finally choosing to live in the center of my own story.